Christmas Eve has a way of showing you exactly who you matter to and who you never really did. I learned that the hard way the year I flew home with a suitcase full of wrinkled clothes and a heart still aching from the betrayal that blindsided me in Seattle. I was 33, though it felt like life had aged me 10 extra years in one long, brutal day. I remember riding in the back of that Uber from the airport, watching the Christmas lights smear into streaks of gold and red on the wet pavement. The driver hummed along to some holiday playlist, and I stared out the window, trying to convince myself that the worst part of my year was already behind me. I still wonder what you are doing right now while listening to this, because for me, when this story began, I was in that back seat, fighting the sting of unwanted tears, and hoping the world would give me a break for at least one holiday. Just 12 hours earlier, I had been in the small office of the startup I helped build from scratch. Tyler Briggs, my partner, and the man I once thought I could trust with my future, stood there holding a folder while avoiding my eyes. He told me the board had decided that he should take full control of the company. He never looked ashamed, only relieved. His new fiancé's uncle owned the biggest share of the investment. They had planned it perfectly, smiling at me in meetings, pretending everything was fine while preparing the paperwork that removed me from my own creation. The last thing I saw before walking out with my box of belongings was the crooked logo I had designed still taped to the wall. By the time the elevator doors closed, the company was no longer mine. With nowhere else to go, I booked a last-minute flight to San Jose. I told myself spending Christmas with my dad, Gregory Keller, and his wife Serena would be a temporary bandage. Serena never liked me, but she tolerated me, or at least pretended to. I thought I could survive a few days under the same roof. When the Uber dropped me at their house on December 23rd, their driveway was lined with bright reindeer lights and fake snow sprayed across the windows, even though real snow was on the forecast. Serena opened the door wearing a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my month's rent. She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. My dad hugged me tightly, almost too long, but as soon as he let go, he glanced at Serena like he needed to check if everything was acceptable. The house smelled like cinnamon, cloves, and pine. Every room was decorated. It felt warm and festive, something I used to love as a child. I told myself I could manage a couple of days, especially since I hadn't rented a car. I figured I would stay inside, maybe borrow one of my dad's cars if I needed to. I didn't imagine needing escape options. Not then. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the house was buzzing with preparations. Caterers had already delivered trays. The kitchen counters were covered in half-prepared dishes and expensive ingredients. Serena told me to help her finish dinner. I said yes because saying no on a holiday felt wrong, even if she always found a way to twist my efforts into an insult. She asked me to carry a large crystal bowl to the dining room. It was cold and heavy and beautiful. I didn't know it belonged to her mother. I didn't know it was her favorite piece in the entire house. I just knew my hands were dry and trembling from everything I had been through. The bowl slipped. It fell at an angle. It hit the tile floor with a sharp crash and exploded into glittering shards. For a moment, the world went silent. Then Serena screamed. Not startled, furious. She rushed toward me, demanding to know what was wrong with me. She said I had ruined the holiday. She accused me of being careless, disrespectful, and intentionally destructive. She told me I had never respected her. Not from the day I met her. My dad rushed into the kitchen, startled, asking what happened. Serena turned on the tears instantly, grabbing his arm like I was some threat she needed protection from. She told him I scared her, that my presence made her uneasy, that she could not stay in the same house if I stayed. My dad looked confused, torn, and helpless. He told her to calm down, but Serena only clung to him harder, sobbing louder each time I opened my mouth to apologize. Dinner time arrived. The table looked perfect, like something out of a holiday magazine. Serena sat down, folded her napkin with trembling hands, and announced in a clear, cold voice that she refused to eat if I remained in the house for even one more minute. My dad looked at her, then at me. His eyes shifted in that small, devastating way I had seen before, the way that meant he was choosing the path of least resistance. Choosing her, not me. He cleared his throat, stood up, and told me I should go for the night. He said it was better for the household, better for Serena's peace of mind, better for everyone. I reminded him I didn't have a car. I had arrived by Uber. He looked uncomfortable and said he was sorry, but Serena needed space. She stood behind him with her arms crossed and that faint, victorious smirk she never bothered to hide from me. I told him it was freezing outside. I told him it was Christmas Eve. He didn't change his mind. He walked to the hallway closet and pulled out my thin gray sweater. Not my coat, because that was still in the guest room closet. Just the sweater. He held it out to me like he was returning something he found on a sidewalk. I didn't move fast enough. Serena stepped forward and grabbed my small suitcase from beside the stairs. She shoved it into my chest so hard I stumbled backward. She told me I had already ruined enough of her evening. He guided me toward the front door. His face looked strained, like he hated doing this. But he still did it. He opened the door wide, and cold air rushed into the house in a bitter wave. Snowflakes drifted across the hardwood floor. He didn't care. I begged him to reconsider. I told him I only dropped a bowl. He stared at the dark street instead of at me. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and tired and carried the weight of someone determined not to argue. "Lauren, you need to leave. Now." I tried to take one step inside to ask him to just let me stay in the foyer until I arranged a ride. But he placed both hands on my shoulders and guided me firmly across the threshold. Not violent, but deliberate. A final dismissal. He let go only when both my feet were outside. Then he closed the door and locked it. The click of that deadbolt sliding into place went through me harder than the cold did. I stood on the porch in my thin sweater, snow melting into my hair, my suitcase at my feet. I pulled out my phone out of instinct, but the screen flickered once and went black. The cold had finished what the low battery started. I could see shadows moving inside as they continued their evening like nothing had happened. Like I had never been part of that family at all. I walked because I had no choice. The snow kept falling, thicker now, the wind cutting through the fabric of my clothes. My teeth chattered. My hands felt stiff. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from a neighbor's house. Laughter. Warmth. Life is moving on without me. I walked because I had no choice. The snow kept falling, thicker now, the wind cutting through the fabric of my clothes. My teeth chattered. My hands felt stiff. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from a neighbor's house. Laughter. Warmth. Life is moving on. I made it to the small park near the old church and sat down on a stone bench under the flickering street lamp. My fingers were numb. My phone battery was dying. Every rideshare app said no cars available. Then I heard it. The soft scraping of bare feet on snow. An older man walked toward me. His hair was silver and tangled. His skin had a bluish tint, like the cold had already seeped into him. His feet were bare on the snow. He shivered violently as he asked in a quiet, broken voice if I knew whether any shelters had space that night. He said he had walked from Bayshore, that everywhere was full. He had less than I did, and that thought broke through every shard of pain in my chest. I stood, pulled off my only warm coat, and wrapped it around his shoulders. He clutched it like he couldn't believe it. Then he held my frozen hands for a long moment. His touch was icy, but gentle. He gave me a small look of gratitude that I felt deep in my bones. Then he walked into the fog. I sat again, colder than before, but strangely lighter inside. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know what to do. I was shaking so hard my vision blurred. Then I heard a deep engine roll into the park. A long black limousine eased to a stop in front of the bench, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. The back door opened. The man I had given my coat to stepped out, but he was no longer shivering or broken or barefoot. He wore polished shoes and a warm tailored coat. His posture was strong. His skin had color again. He looked like someone entirely different, like someone who belonged in a car like that. He walked toward me, calm and steady, brushing snow from his shoulders. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at me with quiet certainty. Then he said 3 words, and my Christmas Eve ended there, suspended on the edge of whatever came next. He said 3 words. "Come with me." For a second, I honestly thought I had imagined them. The cold had slowed everything inside me, like my thoughts were packed in ice. But then I saw his hand, steady and open, waiting for me to take it. Every instinct I had built as a woman alone at night screamed at me not to. Get into a stranger's car, limousine or not. I pulled back on the bench, my jaw shaking so hard my teeth clicked. I managed to ask what he wanted. He did not step closer. He kept a careful distance, like he had learned long ago how not to frighten someone who was already hanging by a thread. He said I was in danger out here. He said, cold like this was not something you pushed through with grit. He said if I stayed on that bench much longer, I might not wake up at all. He told me he had somewhere warm and safe, and that if I got uncomfortable at any point, I could tell the driver to take me anywhere I wanted. I looked down at my hands. Snow had crusted in the folds of my thin sweater. My fingers were stiff. My toes had gone beyond numb, into a frightening nothingness. I thought about walking back toward the neighborhood and knocking on a stranger's door. I thought about ringing my dad's bell and seeing Serena's face, triumphant and cold. Those were my options. Sometimes trusting a stranger is less dangerous than trusting your own family. So I stood up. My legs wobbled. He didn't touch me until I took one step in his direction. Then he offered his hand again, and I let him guide me those few feet to the open limo door. Heat rolled out like a soft wave. The smell of leather, cedar, and something faintly warm wrapped around me. I half fell into the seat, the warmth stinging my skin as the feeling started to return. He got in across from me and nodded to the driver. The door shut with a soft thump. The car glided forward. For a few seconds, I just stared at the passing lights. Christmas lights blurred through tinted windows. Trees swayed. Neighborhoods slid past like pieces of someone else's life. My body hurt as blood moved back into my fingers. I focused on that pain because it meant I was still here. I looked at him then. Clean now. No shivering. No purple tint to his skin. Older. Late 60s, maybe. Lines carved deep around his mouth. But his eyes were steady. He pressed a button on a small panel and quietly told the driver to take us home. Not my home. Hi. He told me his name was Elias Ridgewell. He said he had run a large real estate group in the Bay Area for decades, and that he had been retired for a few years now. His voice had the quiet confidence of someone who spent a lifetime making high-stakes decisions and now treated them like old memories. I said my name in a voice still rough from the cold. He repeated it softly, like he was memorizing it. He asked if I needed a hospital. I shook my head, told him I was just frozen, tired, and maybe a little stunned. He gave a small nod. He said he usually had to walk much longer before anyone would even look him in the eye, let alone give him their only code. I blinked at him, confused. He explained. Every Christmas Eve for the past 20 years, he left his estate without a phone or wallet and walked the streets like someone who had nothing. He said it started the year after his wife died, when he realized how easily he had forgotten what true hardship looked like. He said he made it a ritual. He would walk until he found someone who chose kindness when no one was watching. Some years, he found no one. Some years, he settled for someone who tossed a few dollars without looking at him. But this year has been different, he said. This year, someone gave away the only warm coat she had. I sat there, trying to understand the twist my life had taken. I told him I didn't know what he wanted from me. People like him did not usually enter the lives of people like me without some kind of catch. He smiled faintly, not wide, just enough to soften his face. He said all he wanted tonight was to get me warm, fed, and safe. Everything else could wait until morning. I leaned back. I let my eyes close. The hum of the engine blended with faint music from the front of the car. My body sank deeper into the seat. When I opened my eyes again, we were turning through tall hedges toward a set of wrought iron gates. They opened automatically. We passed a small security booth. The driveway curved under old trees until a house came into view. Large. Stone. Warm light glowing from the windows. Quiet wealth. Not the loud kind Serena loved. The limo stopped under a covered entry. A man in a dark suit opened the door for me. Inside, the house felt like stepping into a different world. Wood smoke. Spices. A massive Christmas tree in white and gold, a stone fireplace taller than I was, books everywhere, family photos, nothing sterile or showy. A home. Elias guided me into a living room and motioned for me to sit. A woman appeared with a tray. A mug of hot tea landed in my hands. The heat seeped through my fingers, warming me from the inside out. Elias sat across from me. He didn't pry. He simply said I looked like someone who had been dropped too many times in one day. He said if I ever wanted to talk, he'd listen. If not, he'd respect that too. I drank the tea slowly. My eyelids kept dropping. The woman returned to say a room was ready upstairs. Elias told me to get some sleep and that tomorrow would make more sense. Upstairs, the guest room looked like something out of a catalog. White linens, thick comforter, a faint lavender scent. The woman handed me flannel pajamas. I changed clumsily, slid into the bed, and was asleep in seconds. The next morning, I woke to sunlight pouring across the sheets. It took me a full minute to remember where I was. Then, everything rushed back. I wrapped the robe around me and followed the smell of coffee. Downstairs, a room full of tall windows overlooked the lake I had only glimpsed at night. Elias sat at the table reading papers. He looked up and nodded toward the seat across from him. A mug of coffee appeared. The smell made my eyes sting unexpectedly. He studied me quietly. Then he said I probably had questions. I told him that was an understatement. I asked him why he did all this. Why did he pick me up? Why bring me here? What he wanted. He rested his hands on the table and said that people like him spent too many years calculating value in numbers. Deals. Profit. He said somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing people who struggled. He said he made himself a promise years ago that if he ever had more than he needed, he would help someone who had nothing left but a good heart. He said I had given away my only coat without expecting anything in return. He said that mattered. He said he could not undo what my family had done or what my partner had taken from me. But he could give me one thing I desperately needed, a chance to choose my life again. Not from the middle of a cold park bench, from a place of safety, warmth, clarity. I stared out the window at the lake, glassy and still under the winter sun. I told him I did not know what he expected from me. He said nothing. Not yet. Not until I decided what I wanted. I held my mug in both hands, trying to absorb the warmth. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like a question. And questions were gentler than cliffs. I told him I didn't trust this yet, but I didn't reject it either. He smiled that small, quiet smile again. He said that was enough for today. And in that winter morning light, sitting across from a stranger who had given me shelter when my own family wouldn't open their door, I began to wonder what it might cost to say yes. The next morning, the answers started to unfold in small, careful pieces. I woke to pale winter light sliding across the ceiling and the faint clink of dishes coming from somewhere below. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. The bed was too soft. The room was too quiet. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back like cold water. The bench, the snow, my dad's hand on my arm, the stranger in the limo who was not a stranger at all. I pulled on the robe and slippers that had been left for me and stepped into the hallway. The house felt different in daylight. Tall windows pouring light into long halls. Framed photos of people I did not know, oil paintings of places that looked like old Europe. It was grand, but not showy. Everything felt intentional, lived in, not like the staged perfection in Serena's house. I followed the smell of coffee and something warm and buttery. It led me to a room that looked out over the water I had glimpsed in the dark. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a wide, still lake with tall trees rising on the far bank. The sky was clear. A flat winter blue, the kind that looks colder than it feels. Elias sat at a small round table near the glass. He wore a dark sweater and had reading glasses low on his nose as he studied a stack of papers. When he saw me in the doorway, he took off the glasses and gave me a small nod, like he had just been waiting for me to appear at exactly that moment. He told me with a calm assurance that I was safe here, that no one in this house would put me out in the snow or raise their voice at me. at the breakfast table. He said it the way other people might say good morning, like it was simple, obvious. Not the rare thing it felt like to me. A woman came in and poured coffee into a cup in front of me. The smell made my chest ache a little because it reminded me how long it had been since someone simply took care of me without strings attached. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and tried not to let him see how much it meant. There was a folder on the table near his elbow, thick, cream-colored, with a few tabs peeking out the top. He rested his hand on it for a second, like he was weighing whether to open it. Then he said he had asked his staff to look into something after I went to bed. Not about me, he added quickly. About the people who had put me on that bench in the first place. My stomach tightened. I stared at the folder, and then at him. Some part of me braced for judgment, for him to confirm that I really was the problem, that Serena had been right all along, that I was careless and unstable and whatever else she had said in the kitchen, while sobbing into my dad's shirt. Instead, he opened the folder and slid it a few inches toward me. He told me that from public records and documents anyone could access if they knew where to look. It was clear my dad had once been careful with money. He had a solid retirement, an old-fashioned mix of savings and investments built up over decades. Then, about 2 years earlier, something changed. Accounts that had been steady began to shrink. A home equity line appeared. Money was moved from safe places into what he described gently as adventurous choices. There were transfers into accounts with only Serena's name on them. There were large withdrawals before holidays, and luxury purchases that did not line up with my dad's old habits. I stared at a copy of a statement showing a high balance one winter and a much lower one the next. It felt strange seeing my dad's name printed in neat type on paper that belonged to someone else's world, to this man sitting in front of me with all his quiet power. Elias did not bombard me with numbers. He simply pointed to patterns. He said that in his experience, when money starts to move like that, it is rarely because the original saver suddenly becomes reckless all on their own. More often, it is because someone close to them starts tugging on strings. He spoke about Serena without venom, almost clinically. She had joined a small circle of people who liked flashy investments, friends of friends who promised big returns on things that looked shiny but were mostly air. A wellness startup in Arizona, a luxury condo project in Florida, a private fund that guaranteed double-digit returns with almost no paperwork. He tapped a page that listed Serena's name connected to one of those ventures. My dad's name was not there. Yet the money had come from an account they once shared. He said softly that, looking at the pattern from the outside, it seemed Serena had been moving my dad's comfort out of safe places and into things that gave her more excitement and control. He also mentioned something that made my throat tighten. My dad's old golf buddies appeared less and less as co-signers on anything. The few recurring charges that used to show dinners with them had disappeared. The cards used at those places now showed Serena's favorite boutiques instead. He said that to him, it looked like a familiar story. A man who loved peace more than conflict. A woman who loved control more than peace. He paused then and sat back in his chair. He told me he knew how manipulative people could be inside a family, because he had lived it from the other side. He spoke about his son, Mark, how Mark had married a woman who seemed charming and attentive at first. Elias said that slowly, over years, she isolated his son. She whispered that Elias was old-fashioned, that he was holding the company back, that he did not understand the new world. She made every disagreement a sign of disrespect. She framed every question as an attack. By the time Elias realized how far things had gone, he was outvoted in his own boardroom. Documents he had signed in good faith were used to nudge him toward retirement. His son told him with a stiff smile that it was time for new leadership, for fresh ideas. The ideas were not Mark's. They were hers. He described the day he packed up his office into 2 cardboard boxes and carried them past reception while employees averted their eyes. He walked out of the building he had built, just like I had walked out of mine, betrayed by blood and by trust. He met my gaze then. In that moment, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Understood, not pitied, not judged, just understood. My throat burned. I tried to swallow it down, But the tears came anyway. They were hot and humiliating, and I hated crying in front of anyone, especially someone who had opened their home to me as a stranger. I covered my face with my hands, but my shoulders still shook. Elias did not rush to fill the silence. He did not tell me to calm down or say it could be worse. He did not tell me to look on the bright side. He let me cry until the first wave passed. Then he slid a small box of tissues closer to my side of the table and looked back out at the lake to give me a sliver of privacy. I wiped my eyes and said I was sorry. Old habit, apologizing for emotions. He told me there was nothing to be sorry for. That when the people who are supposed to protect you end up using you or discarding you, it leaves a specific kind of wound. And that, in his opinion, no one should have to figure out how to heal from that while shivering on a park bench with no coat. I let out a shaky laugh at that because he said it so plainly, like it was the most obvious statement in the world. He folded his hands on the edge of the table. He said that for now, he wanted to offer me a room in his home for a few days, long enough to sleep, to eat, to let my nervous system remember what it felt like not to be on constant alert. After that, if I wanted, he would help me look at what had been taken from me, both in the company and in my family. Not out of charity, he added, but because he believed in balance. People should not be allowed to strip others of what is theirs without at least being challenged. I looked at him warily. The offer sounded too clean, too generous. I asked him what he expected in return, because no one does something for nothing. Not in my experience. Not anymore. He smiled at that. A tired, almost sad smile. He said what he wanted was to see if the kind of heart that gave away its only coat without a second thought could still exist in a world like this. And if it did, to make sure that heart did not get stamped out completely. He said I could help him with some of the work he did later, if I chose to stay. Evaluate projects. Visit programs his foundation supported. Bring my eyes and my judgment to decisions he no longer wanted to make alone. For the first time since he had picked me up, the word foundation registered. I realized I was sitting across from a man whose decisions probably moved millions of dollars a year. A man who had resources I could not fully picture. And I was in his house because I had put my coat on his thin shoulders in the back. Dark. It was almost too much to take in. Part of me wanted to say no, on principle, to prove I could make it on my own, that I did not need to be saved. Another part of me, the one with the bruises from being shoved out of my company and my childhood, home, on the same day, knew pride alone would not keep me warm or get me justice. I stared out at the lake. The water was still, a pale mirror reflecting the winter sky. My life felt like that surface in that moment, calm on the outside, while everything underneath twisted in unseen currents. I told him quietly that I would stay for a few days, just until I could figure out my next steps. I said it plainly, trying to make it sound temporary, manageable, like I had not just stepped into something much bigger than myself. He nodded once, as if he had expected that answer. He told me there was no rush, that we would take it one day at a time. As I sat there with my hands wrapped around a warm cup and the weight of his offer settling over me, I did not know that saying yes, even with conditions, was the first real step toward reclaiming pieces of my life I had assumed were gone for good. I followed him down the hallway, still unsure if agreeing to stay had been a moment of clarity or a moment of weakness. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles around places built for thinking instead of noise. When he opened a pair of tall wooden doors and stepped aside for me to enter, I realized we were in his study. It was enormous, lined with shelves packed with books that reached almost to the ceiling. A wide desk sat in front of tall windows that looked out onto a slope of green, stretching toward the lake. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar, a warm, steady scent that grounded me the moment I stepped inside. Elias motioned toward one of the chairs facing his desk. I sat down slowly, my palms pressed against my thighs to keep them from trembling. There was something in his expression, a careful patience, as if he knew this next conversation needed to land gently, even though it might not feel gentle at all. He sat across from me and rested his hands on the desk. His tone was calm when he asked if I had ever wondered why my startup had pushed me out, not just in the way that happens when partners fight, but in a way that looked planned, coordinated, almost orchestrated. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. A part of me wanted to pretend I had never considered it, but the truth was, I had replayed every meeting, every late night, every conversation with Tyler since the day he handed me the separation folder. I had turned the memories over so many times they felt thin and brittle. I told Elias it started when Tyler and I broke up 3 years earlier. We had been partners before we were anything else, but once he began dating again, especially once he got serious with the woman he eventually proposed to, things shifted. Decisions got made without me. Rooms I used to walk into freely became closed doors with whispered voices. Inside, I started finding errors in financial reports that should never have been there. Small things at first, easy to chalk up to oversight, but then patterns, then missing documents, then meetings where people spoke as if my position were optional. I told him about the day Tyler brought his then-girlfriend to the office. She had a polished smile and a handshake that felt like she was measuring how tightly she could squeeze before it hurt. She listened politely when I spoke about the company's direction, but afterward I overheard her telling someone in the hallway that I seemed anxious, that I might be overwhelmed, that sometimes founders just are not built for scaling. Elias listened without interrupting, not even when my voice cracked a little. He leaned forward slightly when I mentioned how, in the last several months, Tyler had started looping his fiancé's relatives into discussions about our products, even though they had no official stake in the business. Then Elias turned his laptop toward me. He said he had asked someone he trusted to look at some things that were publicly accessible, along with information Tyler himself had disclosed in investor reports. He clicked a few keys and a document opened. The layout was simple, a collection of notes and charts. My name appeared several times. Next to it were phrases that sent a cold pulse straight through my chest. Unstable, overreactive, difficult to collaborate with, unreliable under pressure. Words I had never seen attached to my performance evaluations. Words that looked like they had been fed into conversations months before mine. Exit. He pointed out a timeline at the top of the page. It showed a pattern of comments from Tyler and one of the investors. Comments that painted a picture of me as unpredictable long before any official documentation indicated concerns. Little suggestions slipped into the ears of decision-makers, repeated just enough times to sound like truth. He said softly that, in his experience, when people want someone out, they begin by rewriting that person's story. They chip away at credibility until the foundation cracks. They stop describing what the person does and start describing what the person supposedly is. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I thought of all the times I had walked into rooms and felt a conversation end, a fraction too quickly. The way some people looked through me instead of at me. I had told myself it was in my head, that I was too sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. But it had not been in my head. He clicked to the next page. My heart stopped when I read one particular note. It referenced a name I had not expected to see anywhere near my professional downfall. Serena, not directly connected, not involved in the company, but there, in black and white, under a list of acquaintances linked to a small investment circle. A circle that included the family of Tyler's fiancée. I blinked at the words, unsure if I was reading them right. Elias explained gently that the connection was not close, not something obvious, but enough to raise a question, enough to make a person wonder how conversations traveled between certain social groups, how rumors found new light, how narratives quietly drifted from dinner tables to business circles without anyone ever stepping into the light to take responsibility for them. I felt heat rising up my neck. I shook my head before the words even left my mouth. I asked if he was suggesting that my stepmom might have known something about what was happening to me. Maybe she had heard something, maybe repeated something, maybe helped shape a story that ultimately pushed me out of the very company I had poured my whole heart into. He did not nod. He did not shake his head. He said only that social networks are sometimes far more tangled and far more toxic than we expect. Those small comments can become large shadows. That the people who smile the brightest can sometimes be the ones carrying whispers that ruin a person's reputation in places they never see coming. My chest tightened, as if invisible hands were pressing against it. Memories flashed. Serena's smug look in the kitchen, the entitled tone in her voice when she said I made her feel unsafe, the way she clung to my dad like I was some threat rather than his daughter. I felt a nausea that was not physical but emotional, a sudden unraveling of beliefs I had held for years about how my family worked, about what they knew, about what they would or would not do. Elias closed the laptop slowly, as if giving me a moment to breathe. He said that sometimes the truth about our families is not a single revelation, but a series of doors opening one after another, each showing something we were not ready to see. I stared down at my hands in my lap. They looked small, pale, unsure. I realized I had been holding on to the hope that my dad had simply folded under pressure, that Serena's cruelty was personal but isolated, that what happened at the startup was independent of what happened in my family. But what if it was all connected? What if the threads crossed in ways I had never imagined? What if I had been standing in the middle of a web without knowing it? I swallowed hard. I felt something solid settle inside me. Not anger, exactly. Not yet. Something quieter but heavier. The beginning of clarity. The beginning of deciding that I could no longer look away from any of this. I raised my eyes to Elias. He watched me with calm attention, his expression neither pushing nor pulling, previously waiting for me to find my own words. I told him I needed to know everything. Whether it hurts or not, whether it shattered the last pieces of what I believed about my family, I needed to see it all, because what they had done to me at that house and what Tyler had done to me at that company had come from somewhere deeper than one broken bowl or one selfish business decision. He nodded once, slowly, almost like a promise. And in that quiet study filled with morning light, I understood that the truth I had been avoiding for years was about to come into full view. And there was no turning back from it. The truth I had been avoiding for years was about to come into full view. And there was no turning back from it. That realization sat with me the rest of the day like a stone in my chest. I drifted through the hours in the Ridgewell house in a kind of quiet haze. I took a long shower, let the hot water loosen muscles I had not realized were clenched. I borrowed a clean sweater from the closet in the guest room. I walked along the edge of the lake behind the house, my breath puffing in the cold air, watching small ripples spread across the surface when a duck landed and skidded for a few feet before settling. No matter what I did, my mind kept circling back to my dad's house. My suitcase was with me, but there were still things in that room. A photo album I had kept since high school, a box of old journals, the winter coat Serena had refused to let me grab as she shoved my sweater into my hands. It was not about the objects themselves as much as what they represented. I was not ready to let her pretend I had never existed there. Late that afternoon, I found Elias in the library flipping through a book, glasses on his nose. I told him I needed to go back and pick up the rest of my things. He closed the book carefully and asked if I wanted someone to go with me. I shook my head. Some parts of this I needed to face on my own. At least once. He walked me to the entry where a driver was waiting. Before I stepped out, he suggested calmly that I might want to record the interaction in case anyone ever tried to rewrite what was said or done. He said it without pressure, just as a practical thought. I nodded slowly. The idea made my stomach twist, but it also gave me a strange sense of quiet strength. The truth would be whatever it was, but at least this time it would not be only my word against theirs. On the ride over, I pulled out my phone and checked the battery. It was nearly full after charging all morning. I opened the camera app, set it to record, and slipped the phone into the pocket of my coat with the lens pointing outward. I practiced walking and moving my arms a little until I was fairly sure the angle would capture whoever stood in front of me. The closer we got to my dad's neighborhood, the more my chest tightened. The houses looked like they always had, big and bright and full of the kind of security money could buy. Nothing on the outside showed the fractures inside. The driver stopped at the curb in front of the house. I sat there for a few seconds, watching my own breath fog the window, then finally opened the door and stepped out. The snow from the night before had been plowed to neat banks along the street. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that could go either way, sun or storm. I walked up the driveway slowly, feeling every step. My feet knew the path by memory. The porch felt both familiar and foreign. I pressed the doorbell and waited. Serena opened the door. She did not look surprised. She looked almost pleased, like she had been hoping for this moment. Her eyes swept over me and the coat I was wearing, taking everything in. She stepped just far enough into the doorway to block it. She told me I had no place there. Her tone was light, almost conversational, but the words themselves were sharp. She said my dad did not need me dropping in and stirring up trouble. She said that ever since I was a teenager, I had a talent for making messes and then acting like a victim when people reacted. I let her finish. The phone in my pocket was still recording. I could feel its weight against my leg like a small secret. I told her I had only come to collect the rest of my belongings from the guest room. I kept my voice even, the way I used to speak to difficult clients at work. I did not apologize. I did not raise my voice. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. She said they had assumed I would send someone else, a friend, a mover, anyone with a little dignity. She said, walking back up here myself just proved that I never understood boundaries. I asked if my dad was home. Her eyes flickered for a second before she recovered. She stepped back half an inch and called his name over her shoulder. A moment later, he appeared in the hallway behind her. He looked smaller somehow. His shoulders hunched, his eyes tired. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, as if I had interrupted him in the middle of some domestic chore he did not really want to be doing. For a heartbeat, his expression softened when he saw me. Then he glanced at Serena. It was subtle, but I saw it. The quick check, the silent question, the way his face shuddered as soon as he saw the way she was looking at him. I asked my dad directly if I could come in to get my things. I kept my eyes on his, ignoring Serena's presence for one small moment. I told him I would be quick. I would not disturb anything. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His throat worked. It was like watching someone caught between two doors. I waited, holding my breath. Before he could say anything, Serena stepped forward again, reclaiming the space between us. She said my dad did not want me in the house. She said it was too upsetting for him. She said they had agreed that it was best if I stayed away. I did not look at her. I kept my gaze on my dad. I asked him if that was true. If he, not Serena, wanted me gone. My voice came out softer than I intended, but clear. He stared at the floor for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet. He said it was complicated. Those things were delicate. That Serena had been through a lot lately, and he needed to consider her feelings. Which was not the same as saying what she claimed. She cut in before he could finish. She said yes, that was exactly what he meant. That he wanted me gone. That he wanted peace. That he did not need me dragging drama back into his life. She told me to stop putting him in the middle. She said grown women did not show up at their parents' houses demanding attention when lives had moved on. She said that I was always making everything about me. Every word was being captured in my pocket. I took a slow breath. The part of me that was still that hurt girl wanted to scream, to shove past her, to run into the room that had been prepared for me and empty every drawer. But another part, the part that remembered the folder on Elias's desk and the quiet strength in his voice when he talked about facts, not feelings, took control. I told my dad I understood. I told him I would not make things harder for him. I said I hoped he took care of himself. His eyes flicked to mine just once, a flicker of something like regret breaking through. But he did not speak. I turned and walked back down the steps, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. Behind me, the door closed. This time, I did not flinch at the sound. It felt final, but in a different way than it had on Christmas Eve. Less like a wound, more like a line being drawn. In the car on the way back to the Ridgewell estate, I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. My hands shook a little as I hit save. I replayed a few seconds, just enough to hear Serena's voice telling me I had no place in that house, claiming my dad wanted me gone. My own questions, my dad's weak attempt at nuance being bulldozed. When I walked into the study, Elias looked up from his desk. I held out the phone. I did not trust myself to speak until he had watched it. He put on headphones, clicked play, and sat back. I watched his face as he listened. His expression did not change much, but his jaw tightened at certain points. When it ended, he removed the headphones and set the phone gently on the desk. He said I had more than I realized. That I did not just have bruised feelings and memories. I had evidence. Evidence of how I was treated. Evidence of who answered on my dad's behalf. Evidence of the dynamic that had been hidden behind polite small talk and staged family photos. He told me that Serena had just done something very foolish. She had revealed herself clearly, without knowing she was being observed by anyone who would ever challenge her. Story. For the first time since I had walked out of that house, I felt something besides grief. I felt a small, steady flame of resolve inside my chest. Serena still thought I was the same girl who could be pushed out the door with a sweater and a suitcase, who would walk away and swallow the hurt. She had no idea who was sitting across from me now, listening to her words on a recorded file, already thinking about what they might mean for everything that came next. I replayed Serena's voice in my head again, the way she had spoken for my dad like he had no voice of his own. She had no idea who was sitting across from me now, listening to her words on a recorded file, already thinking about what they might reveal about everything that came next. Elias sat back in his chair for a long moment. Fingers steepled, eyes lowered as if arranging pieces of a puzzle only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. He said there was someone he wanted me to meet, not a therapist, though he said there would be no shame if that was what I needed too. A lawyer, one who understood both the messy world of startups and the tangled knots of money inside families, where affection and control often look dangerously similar. Her name, he told me, was Marilyn Cooper. She had spent decades representing founders forced out of their own companies, and older clients whose spouses or children quietly rearranged their finances until nothing looked familiar anymore. Late that afternoon, I found myself in a smaller sitting room on the west side of the house. It felt softer than Elias's office, with deep chairs, warm colors, and a stone fireplace that held the faint smell of charred oak. Outside, the sky was turning the kind of muted gray that made the lake look like polished steel. A knock sounded at the door, and a woman in her late 50s stepped in. She carried a worn leather bag and a notebook thick with use. Her iron gray hair was twisted back neatly, her eyes sharp and steady behind thin glasses. Her suit was simple and dark, but her earrings were bright blue, catching the light as she moved. She shook my hand firmly, addressing me by my full name, with the kind of calm that came from having already read more about me than I would ever admit aloud. We sat down. Elias shifted to the side, but stayed in the room, letting Marilyn guide the conversation. She asked me to tell her, in my own words, how the company began, how I met Tyler, how we went from scribbling ideas on napkins to renting our first workspace in a cramped co-working building where we lived on energy drinks and vending machine snacks. I told her about the angel investor who wrote our first real check, how I cried in the parking lot afterward, overwhelmed by gratitude and possibility. I explained the early equity split, the founder agreement we both signed, how everything was 50-50 on paper, even if I was the one writing most of the code and managing operations. I told her how, when bigger investors came in, we renegotiated percentages, but I had trusted Tyler so completely then that I did not question them, language in the later documents as closely as I should have. Marilyn took notes slowly, with deliberate strokes. Every so often, she paused to ask a pointed question. Who drafted that agreement? Whether I had received copies of every revision, who had been in the room during certain conversations, her attention never drifted. When I mentioned Tyler's fiancé and her uncle joining the investor group, Marilyn made a faint mark in the corner of her page and nodded slightly, as if that detail confirmed a suspicion she already carried. Then she moved to what Elias had shown me earlier. The way Tyler and one particular investor had quietly labeled me unstable, unreliable, emotional. The narrative they used to justify pushing me out. She said that if we could prove they had exaggerated or fabricated concerns about my performance, while concealing their true motives, the case might reach beyond a simple business dispute. It could be a breach of their duty to act in the company's best interest. Her words felt sharp but strangely comforting, like someone had finally turned on a light in a room I had been stumbling through in the dark. Then she shifted to my family. Elias slid the folder he had shared with me across the table. Marilyn opened it, flipping through each page without a sound. Bank transfers, dates, investment documents, notes connecting one suspicious movement to another. She paused occasionally to ask about my dad, his age, his health, whether he had seemed confused or hesitant about the financial changes Serena pushed him into, whether he had ever complained, even in passing, about feeling pressured or rushed. I told her my dad had always been steady with money, not sophisticated, not adventurous, but grounded. He was saved. He planned. He avoided risk. But after Serena arrived, the ground shifted. Vacations became flashier. Restaurants are more expensive. He mentioned a real estate investment once that sounded rehearsed, like he was repeating Serena's words instead of his own. He had laughed it off, but now it echoed differently in my memory. Marilyn listened with a kind of clinical warmth. Then she said the words I had been avoiding. It looked like a pattern she had seen many times. Slow erosion of control. Transfers from joint accounts into personal ones. High-risk investments that benefited the spouse or their relatives more than the household. Signatures that might not be authentic. She was careful not to accuse outright. She said the law reserved certain terms for situations that could be proven. But she said, at minimum, it pointed to undue influence. Potential financial abuse. She explained the possibilities in a steady, grounded way. On the business side, there was potential to challenge the circumstances of my removal. Maybe not to reclaim the company entirely, but to secure compensation or leverage negotiations in my favor, enough to ensure Tyler never held unchecked power over me again. On the family side, she said, there were legal tools to protect my dad if he was willing to acknowledge the truth. Updated powers of attorney, financial reviews, reversals of questionable transactions, and, if necessary, filing formal reports of exploitation. She warned that such paths were painful. Families cracked under the pressure. But sometimes healing required ripping away the facade instead of pretending. Nothing was wrong. I asked whether she thought Serena could have casually shared information among her social circle that made its way to Tyler's fiancé. She said that proving direct collusion would be nearly impossible without explicit evidence. But social overlap alone could influence negotiations. It painted a picture of how easily narratives about me could have traveled through small social rings, twisted and reshaped by people who barely knew me. She asked about witnesses, neighbors who had seen Serena cutting off my dad when he tried to speak, relative who had watched him become quieter over time, people who had quietly wondered but never said anything. A few strong statements could reveal a behavioral pattern that might otherwise remain invisible. By the time our meeting ended, my throat felt sore from talking. My pulse was still unsteady. But beneath the exhaustion was something that felt almost like hope. Not the naive kind that assumes everything will work out. The sturdier kind that comes from having a plan, from knowing what direction the next step should go. Life at Elias's house developed a comforting rhythm in the following days. I started walking the loop around the lake each morning with one of his dogs, trailing behind me, the air cold enough to clear the clutter from my mind. Sometimes Elias joined me, slower but determined, pointing out changes in the water or the sky, like he was teaching me how to see things again, not just look at them. We ate dinner at a long wooden table most nights, with the fire crackling nearby. No one asked me to be cheerful. No one asked me to justify my pain. Conversation wandered from books to music to silly stories about Elias's childhood. And for the first time in months, I felt the constant buzz of dread begin to fade. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted again. I was in the kitchen, waiting for the water in the kettle to cool, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my half-sister, Hannah. She was almost 15 years younger than me. And though we were never close, there had always been a thin, delicate line between us, something that felt like softness, trying to survive in a house ruled by Serena's sharp edges. Her message was short, asking if I was safe, saying she was sorry about Christmas. Then there was a link, a private video. My stomach tightened. I tapped it. There I was on the screen, captured from a slight angle. My voice was calm but steady, as I asked my dad if he really wanted me gone. Serena stepped in front of him, voice sharp, speaking over him like she was the only one who mattered. The recording from my pocket had somehow found its way into Hannah's hands. She had posted the clip on her close friends list. No names, no tags. Just raw footage of what happened. A few lines of text, and comments from family members we had not heard from in years. A cousin wrote that they had always known something was off with Serena, An aunt said she remembered seeing my dad shrink whenever Serena corrected him. Someone else commented that they had tried to reach him after he married her, but Serena made it clear they were not welcome. They were just comments, small floating words in a tiny circle of people. But to me, they felt like lights turning on one by one in a house I thought had gone dark long ago. I asked Hannah how she found the audio. She said my phone had been on the counter earlier in the day while I was outside. The video file was the newest one saved. She listened. Then I cried, then shared it because she did not know how else to carry it. She said she loved our dad, but she did not know how to protect him from her own mother. She said she had felt alone for years. My heart broke a little for her, maybe for both of us. That night, I showed the messages to Elias and Marilyn. They both studied them quietly. Marilyn said that when people begin confirming a pattern, even in whispers, it means the truth is not imagined. It is simply hidden. I went to bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Hannah's trembling messages, thinking about my dad's small, quiet apologies, thinking about Tyler's lies, thinking about all the people who had stood by silently, not because they did not care, but because they did not know how to speak. And for the first time since everything fell apart, my determination did not feel like anger anymore. It felt like purpose. The sense of purpose stayed with me into the next morning, a steady current running underneath everything I did. But purpose is not the same as peace. And when I walked into the study after breakfast and saw Marilyn waiting with a thin stack of papers in her hands, something in my stomach tightened. She looked more serious than usual. Even Elias, who normally carried a kind of calm steeliness everywhere he went, seemed heavier around the eyes. Marilyn motioned for me to sit. She placed the papers on the desk without saying a word at first, then folded her hands carefully, the way a surgeon might before giving difficult news. She said she had spent half the night digging through public filings, shared accounts, and financial histories tied to my dad and Serena. She said she had cross-checked bank routing numbers through databases she subscribed to for her work. She said she wanted to wait until she was 100% sure before bringing anything to me. Then she told me what she found. The first page showed account activity from an account that listed both my dad and Serena as joint owners. Over the last 2 years, money had been moved out in regular intervals, transfers going into an account that belonged to Serena alone. Significant amounts, enough to matter, enough to raise questions. I felt my breath catch, a small hitch that made the back of my throat tighten. She flipped to the next page. This one showed several investment documents supposedly signed by my dad, except the signatures did not match. Marilyn pointed out where the loops were different, where the slant of the handwriting changed, where the strokes looked practiced but not natural. She had even placed the legitimate signatures side by side with the suspicious ones. It was not subtle. Not to anyone with eyes. A wave of heat flushed through my face. I leaned back in the chair, putting a hand on my forehead as if that could steady the room. Marilyn continued. She said the third page was the most concerning. It showed repeated transfers from my dad's accounts to a man with Serena's last name. A man whose address was listed in Bakersfield. Her brother. The amounts were smaller than the other transfers, but frequent, almost monthly, and they had no clear explanation attached. No memo, no invoice, just money leaving my dad's accounts in steady drips towards someone who had no legitimate business connection to him. Fraud was not a word she used lightly. She does not use it now. She said it was too early to assign labels, but she said it was absolutely reasonable to consider the possibility that Serena had been abusing her financial influence over my dad. She said it might also indicate she had been hiding money in preparation for something. Divorce, debt, a financial mess brewing elsewhere. Elias watched me silently as I absorbed every word. He finally spoke when Marilyn paused to let me breathe. He said that when truth begins to come to the surface, people like Serena cannot hide behind charm or theatrics anymore. He said there comes a point when the cracks widen and the people who once believed her start seeing the patterns for themselves. He said that once everything was out in the open, there would be no one left to believe her version of things. I stared at the documents again, letting the facts settle into place. My chest ached. Not the sharp pain of betrayal, but the slow, heavy pull of mourning something that had been dying for years without me realizing it. I told them quietly that I did not want my dad destroyed in this. He had made choices, yes, weak ones, harmful ones, choices that cut me in places I never expected to be wounded. But he was not malicious. He was a man who lived by keeping peace, even when the cost of that peace was his own dignity, even when the cost was me. Marilyn said that protecting him was still possible, that exposing what Serena had done might be the only way to pull him out of the hole he did not even realize he had been sinking into. She said sometimes the only way to save someone is to let the truth burn down, everything false around them. I nodded, but the ache in my chest remained. It was a strange thing, wanting justice and mercy at the same time. Later, when I went upstairs to change clothes, my phone buzzed. I saw Hannah's name on the screen. For a second, I braced myself, unsure if she was writing to defend her mom or blame me for the quiet storm building over the family. Her message was only a few words. I am sorry. I am scared of her. I stood there in the middle of the hallway, reading those words again and again. I could almost hear her voice in the lines, small and shaky. She was barely a teenager when Serena married my dad. She had grown up inside that house, under Serena's control, under Serena's moods, under Serena's demands. She was not part of what had been done to me. She was another person caught in the undertow. I wrote back, telling her she was not alone, that none of this was her fault, that I would never ask her to choose between her parents, but I promised I would make sure she stayed safe. She sent a single thankful emoji, and then nothing else. I imagined her closing the door to her room and sitting on the edge of her bed, trying not to let her fears swallow her whole. That evening, the world tilted again. Elias was reading near the fireplace when my phone vibrated with a notification from an email address I did not recognize. At first, I figured it was junk mail. Then I saw the subject line, preliminary audit notification. It was from the Internal Revenue Service. My pulse jumped. I opened the email and scanned the first few lines. The words felt like ice sliding under my skin. The IRS was conducting a preliminary review of my dad's financial activity for the last 2 years, citing irregularities in reported income and unexplained transfers that triggered automatic scrutiny. They were requesting clarification, documentation, and the possibility of an in-person meeting. I turned the phone toward Elias. He read it, lips tightening slightly. He said that this was not unexpected, given what Marilyn had uncovered. He said that once financial patterns become visible to the wrong eyes, or the right ones, depending on perspective, agencies like the IRS take notice. He said that things like forged signatures, undisclosed transfers, and investment discrepancies almost always leave trails that government systems eventually detect. I felt sick. It was one thing to know Serena was manipulating my dad. It was another to realize the violations were so serious that federal authorities were now circling the situation. Elias put a hand on my shoulder as if he could sense the storm inside me. He said this was the beginning, not of destruction, but of truth. He said that Serena had built her life on control, and people like that always believe they can outsmart everyone. But no one outsmarts the paper trail forever. I looked out the window toward the lake. The sun had already dipped below the trees, leaving only a faint glow over the water. The air outside was still. Too still, like the moment right before thunder cracks open the sky. My dad was about to face consequences he never understood he had invited into his life. And Serena, for the first time in years, was about to lose the one thing she had always counted on. Control. That word echoed in my mind long after Elias left the room. I stayed by the window until the lake was a sheet of blackness, and my reflection stared back at me like a pale ghost. I finally went to bed, but sleep came in restless waves, each one breaking with the image of my dad signing papers he did not understand. The next morning, just after the sun pushed a faint gold line over the treetops, the Ridgewell Estates security office called Elias. I heard the knock on my guest room door, light but urgent. Elias told me someone was at the front gate asking for me by name. My heart clenched. There was only one person who would show up without calling first. When I reached the courtyard, I saw him standing near the fountain. My dad looked smaller than I remembered. His winter coat hung loose on him, his shoulders rounded inward, his hands twisting the edges of his scarf like he was trying to hold on to something. His hair, once neatly combed, was sticking up at the sides as if he had run his fingers through it all morning. His eyes found mine, and I felt something inside me twist painfully. I walked toward him slowly. He blinked rapidly and cleared his throat. He said he needed to talk. His voice shook. He said he knew he should have called, but he did not know if I would pick up, after everything. I told him quietly that I would have answered. Elias stayed a few steps back, giving us privacy while still keeping watch. My dad took a long breath and said he got the letter from the IRS. He said he did not understand all of it, but it frightened him. He said Serena told him it was nothing, just a routine review. But the panic in her voice had told him otherwise. He said he had spent half the night staring at their bank statements, trying to remember when certain transactions had happened. But he could not remember, because he had not made them. He looked up at me then, eyes tired and pleading. He said Serena had pressured him into signing things he did not want to sign. She had put papers in front of him while insisting she knew best, while saying he did not have the business mind for investments. She told him he made her anxious when he hesitated. She told him she needed stability, and if he could not provide it, she did not know how long she could stay. He said he felt trapped, that he kept thinking if he just agreed to what she wanted, things would calm down. But they never did. They only escalated, and he had been too ashamed to tell anyone, especially me. Then his voice cracked. He said he had been afraid Serena would leave him if he questioned her, and he did not want to lose the family he thought he was building. He admitted that sometimes he chose her comfort over mine because it felt like the only way to keep peace in his life. I listened. I let every word settle into place. I felt grief and anger and compassion all knot together in a way that made my chest ache. I told him I never wanted to hurt him. I never wanted to see his life fall apart. I said Serena was the one who had pulled him into this mess, not me. I said the only reason any of this was coming to light was because she had crossed lines she thought no one would ever see. His chin trembled. He reached up and wiped his face, but the tears kept falling. He whispered an apology for Christmas Eve, for letting Serena decide how he should treat his own daughter, for closing that door, for acting like I was an inconvenience instead of the person who had always loved him without conditions. He said he had replayed that night over and over and hated himself more each time. I stepped closer and rested my hand lightly on his arm. He flinched, not from me, but from the weight of everything he admitted. I told him I forgave him, not because everything was suddenly fine, but because holding anger against him would not heal either of us. He cried harder then, covering his face with both hands like a child lost in a storm. A few seconds later, the security guard's voice crackled through Elias's radio. He murmured something I could not hear, and Elias stiffened. He stepped forward and told us someone else was at the gate. We all turned toward the driveway at the exact moment a red SUV rolled up behind the security checkpoint. The engine revved once, impatiently, and then I saw her. Serena. She stepped out of the car wearing a long coat and oversized sunglasses even, though the sun was barely out. Her hair was perfectly styled, but there was something frantic about the way she moved, like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. She marched right up to the gate, demanding to be let inside, pointing at the guard, then at me, then at my dad. She shouted that the estate had no right to keep her out. She said she needed to speak to her husband immediately. She jabbed her finger toward the security booth and yelled that this was all a misunderstanding, that she would not tolerate being treated like some intruder. My dad froze. His face was drained of color. For a moment, he looked like a man caught between two worlds, both of them collapsing. The guard remained still, speaking softly into his microphone. Elias stepped forward, voice calm but sharp. He told the guard not to open the gate. He said Serena was not welcomed on the property. He said this was private land, and she had no right to enter without permission. Serena's voice rose higher. She screamed that we were conspiring against her. She said we were jealous of her life. She said I had poisoned Gregory's mind, that I had always been troubled, that I was trying to destroy the family because I could not stand seeing him happy. My dad took a small step backward. I took a small step forward. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply stood there, watching her unravel. Elias kept his hands loose at his sides, but his tone cut through the chaos with a kind of quiet authority that left no room for debate. He instructed the guard to ask her to leave. Politely, firmly. Serena demanded to know who he thought he was. Elias answered with perfect calm that he was the owner of the property she was trying to storm into, and that he would not repeat himself. The guard walked toward her and gestured toward her car. She slapped his hand away, then realized what she had done and quickly stepped back, muttering something about unfair treatment. The guard did not react. 2 more security staff stepped forward, moving slowly but purposefully. Serena's composure cracked then. Fully. She shouted that all of us would regret this. She screamed that none of this was over. She pointed at me with a manic fury that did not look like confidence, but like desperation. She yelled that I would pay for turning my dad against her. I did not move. I did not flinch. For the first time in my life, looking into Serena's furious eyes, I felt absolutely no fear. The guards escorted her back to her car. She tried one last time to push past them, but they remained steady, guiding her to the driver's seat. She slammed the door. The SUV peeled away from the gate, tires spitting gravel. The moment she disappeared down the long road, the air around us seemed to release a breath it had been holding. My dad looked shattered, standing there in the cold courtyard with the wind tugging at his coat. I watched the place where Serena's SUV had vanished, thinking of all the years she had held power through intimidation and manipulation. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood something clearly. Serena did not look unstoppable anymore. She looked scared. That image stayed with me long after her SUV disappeared beyond the gates. My dad stood beside me, wiping at his face again. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like the last few years had hollowed him out from the inside. Elias guided him toward the house, speaking softly, offering warmth and a chair and something hot to drink. I followed, feeling the cold in my chest begin to thaw into something steadier than anger, something like resolve. The next day moved in a strange rhythm. Meetings with Marilyn, calls with financial institutions. Elias sat beside me during every conversation, a quiet anchor reminding me that none of this needed to be faced alone anymore. Then came the first real shift. Marilyn called early one morning, with a thinness in her voice that meant she was trying not to sound too triumphant. She said she had filed a legal request for the company I helped build to, produce documentation about my removal. She said she worded it in a way that made it clear we were prepared to escalate if they refused. She said the request was entirely lawful, entirely routine, but pointed enough that Tyler would not miss the implications. By midday, she forwarded me an email chain she had copied on. It was between Tyler and 2 major investors. They were not pleased. The investors demanded explanations about certain decisions in the months leading up to my forced exit. They questioned why I had been pushed out without a formal performance review or a documented cause. They wanted clarity on why our initial founder agreements had not been honored, and they wanted answers about why several financial projections had changed dramatically right after my removal. Tyler's replies were defensive, vague, full of corporate language that attempted to mask panic. You could hear the tremble between the lines. By the end of the day, one investor CC'd the entire board with a single line. We need to reassess ownership distribution immediately. Marilyn met with me in the study that night. She laid out the scenario clearly. The board suspected malfeasance. They believed Tyler had acted in his own interest, not the company's. They believed the narrative he had spun about me might be false or exaggerated, and they required corrective action. The next week was a whirlwind. Meetings, review sessions, documents pouring in, phone calls from people who once dismissed me, suddenly wanting to schedule time to talk. It all built toward a board vote held on a gray Thursday morning. Marilyn sat beside me. Elias sat behind me. Tyler did not look at me when the vote concluded. The verdict was simple. He was removed from his position, effective immediately. His misconduct investigation would continue, and the portion of company ownership taken from me through manipulated agreements was restored. Not out of pity, not as a symbolic gesture, but because it had been mine all along. I walked out of that boardroom feeling taller than I had in years. I expected to feel vengeful, victorious, burning with righteous fire. But what I felt instead was something quieter, something cleaner, like the world had tilted back into its rightful place. Tyler avoided eye contact as I passed him in the hallway. His face was pale, with a mixture of anger and disbelief. But I did not slow down. I did not even nod. The victory was not in watching him fall. It was standing again. Meanwhile, the storm around Serena continued to tighten. The IRS scheduled a follow-up meeting with my dad. Marilyn accompanied him. So did Elias, who seemed to understand the emotional terrain better than anyone. When they emerged from the building, my dad looked exhausted, but relieved. He had told the truth. He answered every question honestly. He had admitted he did not understand many of the transactions Serena had made. He had not tried to defend what he did not know. Marilyn later told me, honesty saved him. People who confess confusion without defensiveness rarely face the full weight of consequences. He would need to correct filings, freeze certain accounts, and possibly repay small amounts. But he would not face criminal charges. Serena, on the other hand, was another story. She refused to cooperate. She refused to disclose her accounts. She contradicted herself repeatedly. She claimed she managed all the family finances, yet insisted Gregory had. Approved every step. She accused my dad of lying. She accused me of planting evidence. She tried to charm and manipulate the agents. And when that failed, she became combative. Marilyn later described it simply. Serena exposed herself. Within days, Serena's access to all shared accounts was suspended. Her personal accounts were flagged for review. Subpoenas were issued for records she had tried to hide. The luxury condo she once bragged about was revealed to be purchased under manipulated joint funds. And her brother's transfers raised suspicion of a wider pattern that might extend beyond my dad. My dad moved out shortly after that. He called and told me he had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in Redwood City. Nothing fancy, nothing glamorous. But he said it felt peaceful. He said he slept through the night for the first time in months. Hannah chose to live with him. She told me she could not stay with her mom anymore, that the house felt like it was filled with anger. She said she felt safe with my dad again, even if they were starting from scratch. I visited them a few days later. The apartment smelled faintly like new carpet and takeout pizza. My dad had placed a framed picture of us on the kitchen counter, one from when I was 12, and he still tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, before every school photo. Hannah hugged me so tightly, I nearly lost my balance. Something inside me stitched together in that moment, soft and slow, not repaired, but healing. Back at the Ridgewell estate, life felt lighter. I found myself breathing differently. Shoulders no longer curled inward as if protecting something fragile. I still walked the lake in the mornings. I still helped Elias with small tasks he pretended he could not do alone, but clearly just wanted company for. One evening, just before sunset, Elias invited me into the same grand study where he had first told me the truth about my family. He sat behind the desk and gestured for me to take the chair across from him. He said he had been watching me these last few months. Not watching in a controlling way, he clarified, but witnessing the way I handled pain, injustice, betrayal, and ultimately, recovery. He said many people in my situation would have wanted destruction, revenge that scorched everything. But I chose something different. I chose restoration. For myself. For my dad. Even for the parts of my life that had been stolen. He told me he admired that. Then he slid a folder across the desk. It was thick, bound with a simple black band. I opened it and scanned the first page. It was a proposal. He wanted me to take on a leadership role in the Ridgewell Foundation, a philanthropic organization his family had built over decades. He wanted someone who understood struggle and justice, someone who had lived through enough loss to value compassion, someone who could build programs grounded in fairness, not ego. He wanted me. My throat tightened. The room blurred slightly around the edges. I looked up at him, unsure how to find words big enough for what I felt. He smiled gently, eyes warmer than I had ever seen them. He said this was not repayment for giving him a coat on a freezing night. It was recognition of who I was, of what I had survived, of who I had become. I closed the folder slowly, holding it in both hands, feeling the weight of what it meant. Outside, the last streak of sunlight slipped behind the trees. The lake shimmered in fading gold. And for the second time that year, my life shifted in a direction I never saw coming. I closed the folder slowly and held it in my hands like it was something alive. For a long moment, Elias just watched me, giving me space to process what the offer meant. The room was quiet, except for the faint ticking of an old clock somewhere behind me and the muted sound of wind brushing the trees outside. I thought about the girl on the park bench, the one whose fingers had gone numb while she wondered how far a person could fall in one night. I thought about the woman Tyler had tried to paint as unstable, about the daughter Serena had called unsafe in her own childhood home. I thought about the person I felt like right now, sitting in a warm study with a door open in front of me that I never even knew existed. I told Elias that I did not know if I was ready. I admitted that part of me still felt cracked in places, that some days I woke up and half expected to find myself back in that motel, near the airport, scrolling through job listings and wondering how much worse things could get. He nodded in that patient way of his. He said that people who know their own fractures usually make better leaders than those who pretend they have never broken. He said that the work the foundation did was not about showing off. It was about creating places where people could stand up again after being knocked down. He said, very simply, that I understood that better than anyone he had met in a long time. I took a breath and let it out slowly. Then I said yes. Not the shaky yes I had given when he offered me a bed for a few nights. A steady yes. One that came from a deeper place, the place that had carried me through the worst parts of the last year and somehow kept me from turning bitter. The months that followed were a blur of learning and rebuilding, inside and out. I started going into the foundation offices 3 days a week at first, then more as I settled into the role. The building on California Street became a second home in the truest sense, long before we ever used that phrase publicly. I sat in meetings with program directors and listened to stories from people who had slept in cars, in shelters, on relatives' couches. I visited transitional housing projects in Oakland and tutoring centers in San Jose. I walked through hallways where kids were doing homework at folding tables, their backpacks lined up neatly against the walls, their futures suddenly a little less fragile. Elias liked to tease that he had created an apprenticeship for me without calling it that. He pushed me to ask harder questions, to follow the money all the way to the ground. He reminded me that charity without accountability can turn into something that feeds egos instead of lives. At the same time, I worked with Marilyn to finalize the legal pieces of my own past. The ownership documents at my old startup were updated. My shares were restored in full. I chose not to return to an active role there. The company felt like a closed book. Instead, I used the settlement and my regained equity as a safety net, one that allowed me to say yes to projects that mattered without worrying about whether I would be able to pay for groceries in 6 months. News about Serena trickled in from the edges. The IRS investigation deepened. Her brother stopped posting pictures of his new toys online when agents started asking questions. Some of Serena's friends quietly distanced themselves. Others turned on her completely once they realized she had pulled them into schemes they had not fully understood. She was not arrested, at least not in that first wave, but she was forced to unwind investments and repay funds. Her access to my dad's accounts was permanently removed. I did not gloat. I did not send messages. I did not stand outside her world and clap while it burned. I simply let the consequences she had invited finally step through her front door. My dad settled into his small apartment life. He sent me a picture of a plant he had bought for the windowsill, proud of the fact that he had kept it alive for 2 months straight. Anna found a part-time job at a coffee shop nearby and started taking community college classes in the evenings. Sometimes I stopped by after work and we cooked dinner together in his tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing at how cramped it felt compared to the old house. None of us seemed to mind. The first time we talked about Christmas Eve out loud, it was in that kitchen, with the smell of tomato sauce in the air and the sound of the dishwasher humming softly. My dad said he could not forgive himself yet for that night, but he was working on earning the right to be forgiven. I told him that showing up, telling the truth, and choosing differently every day mattered more than any apology speech he could give. Spring has come. Then summer. Time, which had felt jagged and broken for so long, began to move in smoother lines. By early fall, the Ridgewell Foundation was ready to open its newest project, the one I had poured my whole heart into for months. A mixed-use housing community on the edge of East Palo Alto. 200 units of permanent supportive housing, ground floor services, counseling rooms, classrooms, a courtyard with raised garden beds where kids could plant vegetables, and watch something they cared for grow. We called it New Harbor. The day of the opening, the sky was a bright California blue, the kind that seems almost too saturated to be real. Reporters gathered near the entrance with cameras and microphones. Local officials milled around, shaking hands and practicing their talking points. Families who would be moving in over the next few weeks stood in small clusters, eyes wide, holding folders with their move-in dates printed neatly on the front. I stood near the podium on a makeshift stage, smoothing my hand over the front of my simple black dress. I could feel the wooden planks under my heels, feel the vibration of the band warming up down the block. My heart was pounding, but it was not the frantic pounding of panic. It was the deep, steady drum of something important. As I waited for my turn to speak, movement beyond the fence caught my eye. On the other side of the chain link, near a row of small trees that had just started to turn the color of rust, stood my family. The current version of it, at least. My dad wore a clean navy jacket over a light blue shirt. He had shaved carefully, but I could see a missed patch near his ear, the way he had done it when I was a kid. Anna stood next to him in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her hands shoved in her pockets in that self-conscious way teenagers have when they are trying to take up less space than they do. Serena was not with them. I did not need to ask why. My dad's eyes found me. He did not wave or try to get my attention with dramatic gestures. He just watched, shoulders squared, standing as straight as I had ever seen him stand. When our gazes met, he mouthed a few words. He was proud of me. I felt my eyes sting. I nodded, just a small dip of my chin, a silent acknowledgement that I had seen and received what he offered. Hannah caught my eye and smiled, a shy little half-smile that reminded me of how she used to peek around this corner when I visited before Serena's disapproval wrapped around all of us like barbed wire. She looked at the building, at the families holding their folders, at the banners hanging from the balconies. I could almost feel her thinking that the world might be bigger and kinder than she had been led to believe. I did not walk over to them. I did not turn my back either. I simply stood where I was, between the stage and the future, and the people I had once thought I had lost completely. I let the moment exist without forcing it into some perfect picture. The opening ceremony started. A local council member spoke first about funding and zoning and the importance of public-private partnerships. A nonprofit leader talked about housing as a foundation for every other kind of healing. Then my name was called. I stepped up to the microphone, the sun warm on my face, the murmur of the crowd washing over me. I talked about what New Harbor meant to me, about the nights when a safe place to sleep can be the difference between giving up and fighting one more day, about doors that close in cruelty and doors that open in compassion, about how none of us choose the families we are born into, but all of us have a say in the families we build along the way. I did not mention my dad or Serena by name. I did not need to. The story of what had happened to me was woven into every line without ever being spelled out. When the ribbon was finally cut and the band struck up a loud, joyful song, people began to move toward the entrance. Kids darted forward, tugging on parents' hands, eager to see their new rooms. Reporters moved closer with their cameras. Staff members greeted residents by name, handing out small welcome baskets with kitchen towels and soap and a handwritten note. I stepped down from the stage and made my way through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting hugs from people I had only met once but felt deeply connected to. Somewhere behind me, I knew my dad and Hannah were still watching. I did not look back. Not out of rejection. Out of choice. Near the entrance, a small girl in a bright red jacket tugged on the sleeve of my dress. She had big brown eyes and braids tied with little silver bands that caught the light when she moved. She asked, in a small but clear voice, if I was the one who built this place for them. Her question landed in me like a bell. I knelt so we were at eye level. I told her that I did not build it alone. Many people had worked hard to make this real. But I said I did help open the door. I added that the rest, everything that would happen inside these walls, all the laughter and homework and arguments and birthday cakes and late night talks, would belong to her and the other kids and families who lived here. This was their home now. She thought about that for a second, then nodded like it made perfect sense. She slipped her hand into mine and pulled me toward the entry, excited to show me the courtyard garden, as if she had already claimed it in her heart. As we walked through the doorway together, I felt something settle inside me for good. The girl on the bench in the snow had been told by her own family that there was no place for her, that she made people unsafe by simply existing. Now here I was, holding open a door so other people could step into safety, into belonging, into a life they had been told they did not deserve. I did not need Serena to understand what she had lost. I did not need Tyler to watch me succeed without him. Their consequences were their own. My revenge, if you could call it that, was choosing to build something decent and solid out of the wreckage they left behind. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.